When Anne Boleyn was led to the scaffold on May 29, 1536, the crowd whispered about more than just her betrayal of the king. They spoke of a sixth finger on her hand, strange growths on her neck, and devilish marks covering her entire body. Did nature itself warn that this woman would bring a curse upon the English crown? Nearly 500 years later, these terrifying stories continue to live on. In popular culture, Anne Boleyn is often portrayed as a woman with physical deformities that supposedly revealed her connection to dark forces. But where did these rumors come from, and what's truth versus malicious lies? Today, when we can analyze historical sources with scientific precision, it's time to examine one of history's most persistent myths. Because the story of the deformed queen tells us less about Anne Boleyn herself, and more about how political propaganda can distort someone's memory for centuries to come. The most famous deformity of Anne Boleyn was the legendary sixth finger on her right hand. This detail appears in descriptions by Catholic propagandist Nicholas Sander, who wrote his chronicle 20 years after the Queen's execution. According to him, Anne had a projecting nail on her right hand finger, which she always concealed. Notice, not a full finger, but merely a protruding nail. But Sander didn't stop there. In his description, Anne appears as a true monster. She had a large goiter on her throat, which she covered with high collars. She was swarthy, with protruding teeth, and her right eye was significantly larger than her left. It seems the author collected every possible physical defect into one portrait. Other hostile sources added new horrifying details. They spoke of strangely shaped birthmarks that supposedly covered her body. They mentioned an unusually long neck that she tried to hide under high collars. Some even claimed she had hair on her chest, a detail meant to finally convince readers of her inhuman nature. What's characteristic is that all these descriptions appeared only after Anne's death. During her lifetime, when she was Queen of England from 1533 to 1536, no such remarks about her appearance can be found. On the contrary, contemporaries noted her grace, liveliness of mind, and ability to charm those around her. The Venetian ambassador who saw Anne at court wrote, "She is not the most beautiful woman in the world, but she has lovely eyes and an elegant neck." French poet Lancelot de Carles, who knew her personally, praised her grace and wit. None of those who actually interacted with Anne Boleyn mentioned any physical deformities. The surviving portraits of Anne Boleyn tell a completely different story. In them, we see a woman with regular facial features, a graceful neck, and most importantly, completely normal hands. Artists of that era were extremely attentive to detail. If the queen really had a sixth finger, they would have either honestly depicted it or carefully hidden her hand behind dress folds. But in all portraits, Anne's hands are open and clearly visible. 5 fingers on each hand, no strange growths or deformations. Moreover, her hands are depicted as objects of pride, long, elegant, adorned with beautiful jewelry. This hardly suggests a woman trying to hide some deformity. The high collars that supposedly concealed a goiter on her neck were simply the fashion of the time. All aristocratic ladies of the Tudor era wore such collars. They were symbols of status and elegance, not attempts to mask physical defects. Modern doctors who have studied Anne's portraits find no signs of the diseases that could have caused the described deformations. A goiter, for example, would be clearly visible even under a high collar, and artists of that era didn't hesitate to depict such features. Just look at portraits of other historical figures with actual physical characteristics. Interestingly, even Anne's enemies during her lifetime criticized her character, ambitions, and religious views, but not her appearance. Spanish ambassador Eustace Chapuis, a fierce opponent of Anne, described all her sins in detail in his reports to Emperor Charles V, but never once mentioned any physical deformities. And this would have been a trump card in his propaganda game. To understand where the myths about the deformed Anne Boleyn came from, we need to remember what a storm she caused with her appearance at the English court. When Henry VIII decided to divorce Catherine of Aragon to marry Anne, he essentially challenged all of Catholic Europe. The Pope refused to recognize the divorce, and the king was forced to break relations with Rome, creating his own Anglican Church. For the Catholic Church, Anne Boleyn became the embodiment of heresy and debauchery. She was the very woman who seduced the pious king and led to a schism in the Christian world. But how do you turn a living woman into a symbol of evil? How do you convince people that she truly carries a curse? The answer is simple. you need to prove that nature itself marked her as a spawn of darkness. In medieval consciousness, physical deformities were often perceived as external signs of inner evil. If a woman has a sixth finger or strange birthmarks, then the devil has left his mark on her. Nicholas Sander, who created the most detailed description of Anne's deformities, was a Catholic priest who fled England after Henry's religious reforms. His book, On the Origin and Progress of the English Schism, was written with a single purpose: to prove that England's departure from Catholicism led to catastrophic consequences, and Anne Boleyn's figure was the perfect symbol of this fall. It's interesting to trace how exactly rumors about Anne's appearance spread. In the 16th century, there were no photographs or video recordings. People relied on eyewitness accounts. But what if the eyewitnesses deliberately distorted the truth? Sander wrote his book in the 1580s, when more than 40 years had passed since Anne's execution. Most people who personally knew her had already died. The new generation of Catholics knew about her only through rumors, and these rumors became increasingly fantastic with each retelling. Catholic propagandists used a time-tested technique. They took a grain of truth and inflated it to monstrous proportions. Perhaps Anne really did have a small nail defect on one finger. Such minor peculiarities exist in many people. But in the mouths of her enemies, this became a devilish sixth finger. High collars, which were a fashionable trend of the time, became proof that she was hiding a goiter. Dark skin, which contemporaries considered a sign of exotic beauty, became inhuman pallor. Every feature of her appearance was reinterpreted in a negative light. What's especially important, these descriptions were created not for Anne's contemporaries, but for posterity. People living in the late 16th century needed an explanation for why their country had departed from the true faith. And the figure of the Witch Queen perfectly suited this role. Anne Boleyn was not the only queen whose enemies turned into a monster. History is full of examples of how political opponents used rumors about women's appearance to discredit their power. Marie Antoinette, the last queen of France, also became a victim of such a campaign. Revolutionary propaganda portrayed her as a debauched foreigner who brought the country to ruin. Pamphlets of that time called her the Austrian bitch and attributed the most incredible vices to her, from lesbianism to incest with her son. Elizabeth Bathory, a 17th century Hungarian countess, went down in history as the Blood Countess, allegedly killing hundreds of girls. Modern historians believe that most accusations against her were fabricated by political enemies who wanted to seize her wealth. Catherine de' Medici, the 16th century Queen of France, gained a reputation as a poisoner and sorceress. She was accused of using magic to influence her king's sons. In reality, she was a clever politician who tried to preserve the country's unity during an era of religious wars. In all these cases, we see the same pattern. A strong woman threatening someone's interests is turned into a demon or witch. Physical deformities are attributed to them after death, when they can no longer defend their reputation. The most amazing thing about Anne Boleyn's story is how her deformities survived to our day. In the 19th century, when interest in the Tudor era revived, writers and artists eagerly adopted the image of the deformed queen. Victorian authors loved Gothic plots, and the figure of Anne the Witch fit perfectly into the fashion for dark secrets of the past. In novels of that time, she was portrayed as a femme fatale with a dark secret who drove the king to madness. 20th century cinema also couldn't resist the temptation to show the real Anne Boleyn. In films and TV series, she often appears with long sleeves hiding her hands, or with high collars supposedly concealing a goiter. Even serious biographers sometimes succumbed to the temptation to mention Anne's possible physical peculiarities, although no evidence of their existence exists. The myth became so much a part of popular culture that many people still believe in its truth. The internet age has only intensified the spread of these delusions. Posts about Anne Boleyn's sixth finger regularly appear on social media, accompanied by fake historical facts. Recommendation system algorithms promote the spread of sensational but false stories. Today we have tools that historians of the past could only dream of. X-rays of portraits, analysis of paint pigments, computer reconstruction of faces from skulls. All this allows us to look at the past with completely new eyes. And what does modern science say about Anne Boleyn's appearance? In 1992, a group of British historians and doctors conducted a detailed analysis of all surviving portraits of Anne. They used forensic methods to detect any traces of retouching or deliberate distortion. The result was unambiguous. There are no signs of physical deformities in the portraits. Moreover, X-rays showed that artists didn't hide any peculiarities of appearance. Anne's hands are painted in natural poses, without attempts to hide fingers or mask anything. Her neck is depicted openly, and no traces of goiter or tumors are visible even under layers of paint. Dr. Susan James, a leading specialist in Tudor portrait painting, conducted a comparative analysis of Anne Boleyn's images with portraits of her contemporaries. Anne is depicted in full accordance with the beauty standards of that time, notes the researcher. High forehead, long neck, graceful hands. All this was considered the standard of feminine attractiveness in the 16th century. Particularly interesting are the results of analyzing Anne's earliest portrait, painted around 1530, when she was not yet queen. In it, she is depicted in profile, and her hands are completely open, 5 fingers on each hand, no anomalies. If she really had a 6th finger, the artist would either not have depicted hands at all, or would have painted them in an unnatural pose. Modern doctors have also contributed to debunking the myths about Anne Boleyn. Dr. Michael Ridley, a specialist in genetic anomalies, analyzed all the physical features attributed to her from the perspective of modern medicine. Polydactyly, or the presence of an additional finger, occurs in 1 person out of 1,000, but this condition is almost always hereditary. Anne's father, Thomas Boleyn, had no mentions of such features. Her sister Mary and brother George were also depicted in the portraits with normal hands. The goiter that supposedly forced Anne to wear high collars was quite a common disease in the 16th century due to iodine deficiency in food. But this disease is impossible to completely hide with clothing. A thyroid gland tumor is visible even under thick fabric, especially when swallowing or turning the head. If Anne Boleyn really had a goiter, it would have definitely affected her voice, explains Dr. Ridley. Yet contemporaries noted her beautiful singing and oratory skills. A woman with a serious thyroid disease couldn't have performed so brilliantly at court. As for the birthmarks and other skin anomalies attributed to her, medicine also gives a clear answer here. Extensive birthmarks, especially on the face and neck, were considered signs of a curse in that era. If Anne really had them, she never could have become queen. Henry VIII was extremely superstitious and would never have married a woman with devilish marks. But why have these myths proved so persistent? Why do many people continue to believe in Anne Boleyn's deformities, even in the 21st century? The answer lies in the peculiarities of human psychology and our attitude toward power. Professor David Starkey, one of the leading specialists on the Tudor era, believes that the myths about Anne reflect a deep fear of female power. In a patriarchal society, a woman capable of influencing the king automatically becomes suspicious, explains the historian. If she didn't achieve power through beauty, then she must have used witchcraft, and witchcraft must leave physical traces. Modern psychology confirms this theory. Research shows that people tend to attribute negative physical traits to those they consider morally corrupt. This phenomenon is called the reverse halo effect. If we don't like someone, we automatically consider them less attractive. In Anne Boleyn's case, another psychological mechanism worked: the need for justice. Her tragic fate seems less unfair if you believe she really was a witch or monster. But if you acknowledge that she was an ordinary woman who became a victim of political intrigue, her story becomes too painful. The story of myths about Anne Boleyn is relevant today. In the age of social media and viral content, false information spreads faster than ever. The mechanisms for creating and spreading historical falsifications have changed little in 500 years. Today, political opponents still use rumors about their opponent's appearance and health. Photoshop has replaced verbal descriptions, but the essence remains the same: to discredit a person by creating a negative image of their appearance. This especially affects women in politics. Research shows that female politicians are criticized for their appearance 3 times more often than men. Comments about hairstyles, clothing, or age become ways to undermine their authority, without delving into the substance of their ideas and proposals. The myths about Anne Boleyn teach us to approach any information critically, especially if it seems too sensational. They show how political propaganda can distort historical memory for centuries to come. And they remind us that behind every monster from history, textbooks often hides an ordinary person who became a victim of their time. Anne Boleyn was not a witch, was not ugly, was not a monster. She was an intelligent, ambitious woman who found herself at the center of a historical hurricane and paid for it with her life. And the myths about her appearance are just echoes of that cruel political game in which truth became the first casualty. Perhaps the most important lesson of this story is that we must learn to separate facts from fiction, especially when it comes to figures who provoked controversial assessments even during their lifetime. Anne Boleyn's story is not only a tale about a Tudor-era queen, but also a warning about how easy it is to turn a living person into a symbol of evil. What historical myths seem most convincing to you? Share in the comments your examples of how political propaganda distorted the images of historical figures. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We have many more historical mystery revelations ahead.